Hello everyone, it's Jamarl Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. Hope everyone is doing okay. Hope you guys have had a decent, afternoon at this point. It's a little bit after 2 there, I believe-ish. Yeah, 4 p.m. Yeah. Long day, not a bad day, just a long day. So let's jump into a story that I think is interesting. First, let me check my volume. If you guys enjoy the content, if you dig what I'm putting down, and you find yourself coming back to this channel often, please subscribe. Please click the bell, because I do live streams. I try to do them every day or so. I may miss a day or so, but for the most part, pretty consistent. And I even find myself doing them on the weekends. And so I do live streams pretty much anytime. So yeah, please hit the bell so you can get notified. Recently, an interesting story has come out with John Bolton going to war with the International Criminal Court. This is an amazing look, right? Just from the standpoint of optics. The United States freedom, justice, attacking the body that is supposed to seek out and prosecute war crimes. A body of justice that looks bad. Do you know, even in comic books, Superman, this kind of iconic figure that was this kind of representation of America flying through the world, doing the best thing, the Boy Scout. That's above it all. Even he's gone insane in Injustice comic books and has become a tyrant that essentially has been taking over the planet. Injustice is one of my favorite comic book lines, so yes, this applies. It looks bad to go out and attack the International Criminal Court. Now, why is John Bolton attacking the International Criminal Court? Isn't that one of those interesting things? Me do think the lady protests too much. One of those type things. The United States is not necessarily held to the International Criminal Court because we are not a signatory. It was unsigned by George Bush. I'm going to get into that in a moment. However, there's a catch. Even though we may not directly be signed to it, Afghanistan is. Meaning, if some crime is taking place, some war crime is taking place, in one of the countries that are signatories, then it's fair game. The United States had black sites in some of these countries, and specifically Afghanistan. The International Criminal Court was trying to investigate war crimes of the United States government in Afghanistan. This also expands out to the idea of them investigating war crimes from the standpoint of Palestine. John Bolton has gone to war with the International Criminal Court, threatening sanctions and threatening prosecutions. That looks bad. That looks bad. My mom used to say, look around you, and that's going to give you some idea on who you are, meaning your friends. You are literally out there attacking the International Criminal Court. Let's go into it. Up to this point, the only people that's been prosecuted by the International Criminal Court has been African dictators or Africans. Now, you can imagine that looks bad. It looks bad on a few counts. I've always asked this question. How on earth do you prosecute African dictators when George Bush was responsible for the deaths of 1 million people because he invaded a country on the premise of a lie? How? How do you gain any level of legitimacy when something like that is standing there? Meaning this person went into a country, completely destroyed the country, and in destroying the country ends up destroying the lives of 1 million people. That's not talking about the people who were terrorized, the people who were turned into refugees. That's not talking about the people who lost their jobs, the trauma that's associated with terrorists taking over that particular region of the world, of foreign soldiers occupying your land, not necessarily subject to your laws. It's trauma. It's trauma inflicted on a society and a civilization. And in doing so, completely destabilizing a particular part of the world. How do you skate on that? How does Tony Blair skate on that? How does George Bush go out and just sitting somewhere in his pajamas, in his footies, finger painting? And yet, you will go after African dictators. That seems your lack of legitimacy is showing here. So it warmed my heart that they were investigating the United States in Afghanistan. And then I got an answer to that question. So I'm going to share the answer to that question. Why you're not going to see prosecutions from the standpoint of the International Criminal Court against the United States. It's absolutely fascinating, and I'm going to go into it just as a primer for John Bolton. So Bolton, John Bolton threatens war crimes court with sanctions in virulent attack. God, and look how that bad that sounds. The United States is threatening the court that is involved in investigating war crimes. Why are you threatening the court that's investigating war crimes? Aren't war crimes a bad thing? What do you have to hide? I've always been told by prosecutors, at least when I watch Law and Order and other judge court shows, that if you don't have anything to hide, why are you running? John Bolton looks like a running man here. What John Bolton realizes is that John Bolton himself could be prosecuted for the crimes that he took part in when he was with George Bush in that first war. Hell is hot. John Bolton pushed for sanctions over the International Criminal Court's investigation into alleged American war crimes in Afghanistan. He also announced on Monday that closure of the Palestine Liberation Office in Washington because of its calls for the ICC inquiry into Israel. How dare you call inquiry into Israel committing war crimes when we were shooting all of those unarmed protesters? Those dangerous babies that were being shot and gassed. How dare you, sir? The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecutions by this illegitimate court. Think about that. The court that is literally set up by international treaty by hundreds of nations is being called illegitimate because it is trying to investigate war crimes that the United States has taken part in. Freedom and justice. He said the Trump administration would fight back and impose sanctions, even seeking to criminally prosecute ICC officials if the court formally proceeded with the opening of the investigation to allege war crimes committed by the United States military and intelligence staff during the war in Afghanistan, or pursue any investigation into Israel or other allies. That's amazing. That is amazing. Here's more. If the court comes after us, Israel or other allies, we will not sit quietly, he said, also threatening to impose the same sanctions on any country that aided in the investigation. He condemned the inquiry into war crimes in Afghanistan as utterly unfounded, unjustifiable investigation, and courts as illegitimate. We will let the ICC die on its own. After all, for all intents and purposes, the ICC is already dead. What does he mean by that? Because the thing is, the ICC doesn't have a military, doesn't have a police force, doesn't have anything. It needs a certain degree of cooperation. And not just a certain degree of cooperation. Since the founding of the ICC, the United States has sought to undermine the influence of the ICC using this kind of carrot and stick approach to try to cajole other nations into falling in line with weakening the ability of the ICC to operate. Depending on the president, Clinton allowed the United States to be involved in this. Bush yanked the United States out, formally unsigning any kind of treaty with the ICC. This is fascinating. I knew nothing about this. Let's keep going. So here, this is Terzo. In 2003, John Bolton stated that the United States would not subject its actions to the constraints of the ICC. More than a decade later, the United States still opposes any ICC sanctions against itself or its allies. Now, in this chapter of the WikiLeaks files, Linda Pearson explains how the elite immunity ensures that many of those responsible for human rights abuses remains unreachable under international law. Now, the thought was that the International Criminal Court will provide a way of getting at certain people for prosecutions when their states or their country wouldn't allow it. Meaning, if the country itself didn't have a mechanism by which to judge a person, at the very least, this would allow this kind of extra constitutional body outside of other countries to be able to impose itself. But impose itself agreed upon. Like, not forcibly, but other countries say, yes, we want a body to be able to prosecute war crimes. We don't like war crimes. Right here. When states are unwilling or unable to prosecute individuals alleged to have committed such crimes, the International Criminal Court can offer another avenue of justice. The court was established in 2002 by Rome Statute, an international treaty that has been ratified by 122 countries. It has jurisdiction to investigate individuals for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crime of genocide. During the 1998 conference, 160 nations that formulated the Rome Statute, U.S. negotiations sought to limit the ICC's jurisdiction and its independence. A large number of states wanted to have the court's universal jurisdiction, that is, the power to prosecute crimes committed anywhere. But the United States forced a compromise. The ICC only has jurisdiction over crimes committed by individuals of a state or on the territory of a state which is party to the Rome Statute. The catch here, though, is even though the United States weakened it to this degree, John Bolton is still attacking it even to that degree. Meaning, even under that statute, we go afoul of international law. Like, so the United States can't make this argument of we're above it all, because even under the statute that we initially agreed upon, we've run afoul of this. We've done bad things in Afghanistan, and the International Criminal Court wants to investigate those bad things that we've done in Afghanistan. Why is John Bolton fighting this so hard? Don't you have to ask yourself that? This gets more interesting. Look at this. Do you remember, this was back in, I think it was early either this year or last year, Saudi Arabia comes out, and I don't remember if it was the war with Yemen, but they pre-cleared anybody of any war crimes. Like, if any of our soldiers do anything, our whatever has pre-cleared you of this. You're free. And now we looked at this like, what the hell? How do you pre-clear somebody of war crimes? I didn't know this, but we had our own pre-war crime stuff. Take a look at this. All right. The United States also wanted the United Nations Security Council to have the power to veto prosecutions. That would essentially mean that the United States sitting on the Security Council would have the power to veto anything. That, of course, was a non-starter. All right. So we put through, we put through a law signed by Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton. Okay, right here. So, unhappy with the outcome of the negotiations, the United States President at the time, Bill Clinton, signed the Rome Statute in 2000, but only so the United States would be in a position to influence the evolution of the court. In May 2002, Clinton's successor, George W. Bush, formally unsigned the treaty. If you're unsigning that treaty, you know bad stuff is about to take place. You know bad stuff is about to take place. His Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security, John Bolton, summed up the Bush administration opposition to the court when he said in 2003, whether it's removing a rogue Iraqi regime and replacing it, preventing weapons of mass destruction proliferation, or protecting America against unaccountable courts, the United States will follow its values when measuring the legitimacy of its actions. That is profound. That is profound. And said by pretty much any war criminal, any other war, like that statement can be said by pretty much any war criminal. We will measure our actions based on our own value system, whatever that value system tends to be. Essentially, we're not subjected to your laws. The effect of Bush unsigning was to exclude the United States nationals from the jurisdiction of the ICC unless their alleged crimes were committed on the territory of a state that was party to the Rome Statute, which it was in Afghanistan. Even where it has jurisdiction, the chances that the ICC would ever indict a national are remote, as the court depends on the financial and political support of the West. In its 13-year history, the court has indicted only Africans. Moreover, without its police force, the court depends on the cooperation of governments to detain and extradite those individuals who it indicts. It is unthinkable that any United States government would surrender one of its nationals to the ICC. I hope you get my point. It's a paper tiger. There is no such thing as international law, because the only way you can ever enforce the international law is essentially through agreement. What if the country doesn't agree? What if the country doesn't agree? And the idea that the only people you're locking up are Africans, or at least trying are Africans, completely destroys the legitimacy of the court. Completely undermines it. Nevertheless, the Bush administration wanted to eliminate any possibility that they might one day themselves see The Hague. In August 2002, Bush enacted the American Service Members Protection Act, which authorized the United States president to use all means necessary to free a U.S. national detained by the ICC. The ASPA, or the Hague Invasion Act, as it became known, also banned military aid to countries that helped ratify the Rome Act. Further measures passed in 2004, known as the Nethercutt Amendment, extending the scope of the sanctions to economic support funds assistance. ESF funds are provided to countries' strategic interests to the United States foreign policy for a variety of programs, including peacekeeping, democracy promotion, counter-narcotics initiatives. NATO countries and designated major non-NATO nations were exempted from the measures. The restrictions could be waived for other countries if the president deemed it important to the national interests of the United States. These, to some degree, were bribes. That's what we're hearing. It's a carrot and a stick approach in dealing with this. For the other states that signed the Rome Act, the only way to avoid sanctions was to sign the Article 98 or bilateral immunity agreement with the United States, by which they agreed not to surrender Americans to the ICC without the consent of the United States government. This is what we were doing. This is what we were doing to undermine the ICC. Now, you can kind of understand this, right? If I'm a fast runner, maybe I don't want to be held by your laws, in this case, slowing me down. Meaning, if I'm a superpower, why do I want to be constrained by these regular laws? These laws are for regular people. Not a goddamn regular person. I'm a fucking Superman. I strongly suspect that that's the perspective that Bolton are looking at. That Bolton is, Bolton, Bush, and these other guys are looking for. Curling 876, congrats on monetization. Oh, thank you, man. Imad Ordi, good morning from Melbourne. No surprise here. While the left is distracting with virtue bullshit, the empire is preparing for war and working like a charm. Yes, elephants on coat. Off topic here, but there was a 1986 Nicaragua versus the United States case in the International Court of Justice. The ICJ ruled against the United States for supporting the Contras, laying mines to Nicaraguan harbors. Yeah, but how do you enforce that? Like, this is the point that I'm trying to make here with the International Criminal Court stuff. Anytime you hear people saying international law, international law, international law, yes, but who enforces that? Nobody. If it's not somebody that we necessarily want to go after, then they're not going to be going after. And in this case, you have the United States working by hook or by crook to completely undermine any chance that any American would ever be held up in an international criminal court. Not just any American, but any ally to America. That's some heavy stuff, right? That's some heavy stuff. The empire is terrified of being judged impartially. It's terrified of it. You only lock up Africans. If you're only locking up Africans, I would suggest to you that your legitimacy is not there. It's not there. a minority. All laws, national and international, are set by oligarchs. They are, that's true. To a point. Like, clearly, John Bolton doesn't like what's taking place here from the standpoint of international law. And there are times where certain things get through that have a humanitarian bend to them. Like, nobody gets out of bed in the morning and recognizes themselves as a horrible person. People, countries, like to quote themselves in certain language that they are working for freedom and justice and working for the best ends and all this other stuff. The reality of it sometimes is very different than that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't certain laws and things in place that reach for the angels of our nature. I would say the ICC is one of those things. At the very least, on paper, the way it should act. But the problem of that is, if you only seem to be pointing at African dictators, and yeah, I know they were talking about going after Duarte at one point, then you lose a certain degree of legitimacy. That's all. That's all. Just because laws are set by oligarchs doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't things that are to the better angels of our nature. Yvonne Lola saw. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you, Yvonne. I wanted you guys to be able to, I wanted you guys to get the point of view of the criminal court from this standpoint. Yeah, John Bolton could declare war on the criminal court because John Bolton knows that the criminal court is a paper tiger and it ultimately can't do anything to him. But to some degree, he is concerned because he knows that he himself would be under, you could say, under threat in this regard. But nobody is ever going to come after John Bolton. Nobody is ever going to drag George Bush or Tony Blair out before The Hague. They would never see The Hague. They will go after African dictators that haven't killed a fifth of the number of people that George Bush ended up killing. And nevertheless, they go on. Jamal, don't you get a bigger cut of Super Chat when you don't use YouTube? You mean Streamlabs? I think so, yes. I think so, yes. Laws protect winners, no longer about justice. Yes. Yes. Emandi, yes. That's true. Justice has little to do with this anymore. It's like, think of property rights. You know, think of like I was when I was in Kenya, I was asking them about buying water. You have to buy water. There are some people living in so like these magnificent places, and other people are living in complete squalor. It just seems so magnificently unfair. But those laws are in place to protect the status quo the way the status quo is. It's nothing to do with justice. I mean, we're spending $1 trillion on the military. How much would it take to get rid of poverty? You know that number, I think it was like $150 billion. You spend $1 trillion on the military. Like, it's hard to fathom that number. It's hard to fathom that number. When you ever hear, if you ever get the chance, listen to Martin Luther King's speeches about the Vietnam War. And he's making this argument about the military budget and the dropping of bombs and everything else, and killing and murdering people, how the great society is hitting his head on the shores of Vietnam. And he's making this clear point that you can't do both. You can't have an empire and spend so much resource into maintaining the empire while at the same token letting the internal workings of your country just fall apart. You can't do both. The military budget is vastly more than what the military budget was back then. And the same argument holds true. It's prophetic. It's completely prophetic. All right, guys, I'm going to end this. It's late here, so if you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and you can always support the Patreon. Thanks all, and thanks everyone for supporting the show. Krillin, Mondi, Elephants on Coke, Yvonne. Thank you guys, I appreciate it. Have a good night all.